So hopefully you're able to see the screen just now. Yeah, so my name is Mark Wong, and I'm based in urban studies. I'm senior lecturer in public policy and research methods there in the School of Social Political Science, and also recently became deputy head of urban studies. So a little bit about my research, as already described by Emma. There are various strands of research I'm focusing on, but particularly on racial justice, but also on fair and responsible AI and data. So looking at how artificial intelligence works in the space as in the context of racial justice, and also using co-creation methods, which sometimes also called participatory research methods, done publications, toolkits, and also advisory roles. And what I'm really focusing on is around the issues of fairness, bias, and discrimination in artificial intelligence and data, and how we can use co-creation methods to center the voice and action of racialized people and people of color in the digital innovation. And one of the current projects I'm working on is the UKRI-funded Protecting Multi-Ethnic Community online project, which is £3.34 million. I'm currently the Glasgow lead and also co-investigator and a work package lead for the co-design aspect. But I think what's really important to me as why I do my work is that I really do believe that data and AI systems, and there's certain loads of evidence that suggests that it can perpetuate systemic racism and inequalities. And that's what I'm doing in my work, to address those issues, make sure that the service access and outcomes and people of color can be fair. So I think broadly thinking about justice, issues of sustainability and equity in the digital innovation, including video games, which you'll hear a little bit about, which is my fun project. But that was the glossy version of what I've done. I think my journey so far has been much more kind of, I suppose, sort of like ups and downs and lots of different things happening. I grew up in British colonial ruled Hong Kong, moved to Wales to study in 2005, and then I did my undergraduate, my MSc and then PhD in Edinburgh, which I graduated in 2017, which at the time was the easiest pathway as a migrant international student. After I finished my PhD in 2017, I worked as several roles in research assistant in Edinburgh. In fact, some of them was during my PhD. Then took up my grade 7 lecturer role in learning teaching scholarship track in Glasgow here in 2017. Those of you just joined learning teaching scholarship track, but kind of equivalent to some of the roles like teaching fellows and very learning teaching focused, but also research on how to teach and pedagogical approaches. Then unconventionally, I applied for an internal vacancy in March 2020, moved to grade 8 and a research and teaching post, and then applied for promotion just quite recently in 21-22, and became head of subject just last year. So the journey, it may seem sort of very linear, but it's partly also because I was on this Tier 4 student visa that actually the easiest path to stay on is to keep studying and keep staying in the university. And I think it's important thinking about sort of inequity and equity within academia. We really don't talk about our roots and journeys enough. Sometimes we see the glossy version of the sort of end product of someone's years of work, sometimes decades of work, and then see sort of all the successful outcome. I think it's also really important that we think about, to show kind of honesty, openness, and also kindness to one another and ourselves to make this sort of academic journeys, this PhD life, much less lonely and more equitable for everyone. I think this honesty, openness, and kindness is so important as we think about how the next generation of PGR students should be sort of aiming towards and what we can do to change the research culture that we have, so that it's not behind smoke screens how we got to where we are. I think, and also appreciating and respecting, we all have our own stories, and no one should have to feel alone. Everyone should be able to feel a sense of solidarity and belongingness. But there's also, sort of having said all that, this is also not just on you or on individuals. To kind of move forward in academia, we have to acknowledge the role of systems and also inequitable structures that we operate in. So it's not just about how we do things or we keep doing better, but it's actually also understanding how the systems may be working against certain individuals, particularly those who are historically marginalized, but also who sort of asking questions, who has the privilege in these systems. This could be in academia here, particularly in Glasgow in the UK, also across the globe, but also in our own communities. Where is the privilege visible and invisible? Just going to pause for about 30 seconds for you to have a think. then we're going to do a little Mentimeter activity. But just sort of focus on that question. Have a little think to yourself, reflect on who has privilege in the systems that we're sort of operating today, and where is that privilege visible and invisible? And I should add that there's no right or wrong answer to all this. I think we all operate in very different systems at different levels of our careers, different points in our lives. It's so important to think about how those privileges can affect us and how that can intersect outside of academia, outside of our PhD, with our academic journey. So I'm going to share a little Mentimeter activity here, just so we can have some of those thoughts. And I think some of that can be challenging. So do say if you feel, let's go back to that. If you feel that you want to say something, you can put that in the chat. But what did you think? So what we're going to do is this Mentimeter activity. You can join on any device with a web browser on www.menti.com and then enter this code 24405846. Or you can use your phone to do a QR code scan. I'm going to put this on the chat. So you have, I think I did. There we go. Don't know where the blank screen is, but there's also chat the link and the QR code. So is everybody okay? Anyone? Yep, perfect. I promise this is not going to be too much of a lecture going forward. This is the only activity we've got. Great. Some people have. Right, I'm going to stop share so that we can share it on. You can see the Mentimeter coming up. Right, share. There we are. Should be able to see this. What people are saying on here. The QR code is on the left side here. You see in the word clouds just now? Right, perfect. So the word cloud, that's the bigger the word on this word cloud, the bigger the word means more people are using that word. And the more it gravitates towards the center. So certain people are saying that they're feeling worried, privilege is nebulous, that makes you feel uncertain, because the sort of visible and invisible privilege can be frustrating. If you're marginalized, if you're confused, obvious is also being there, sometimes insidious, and like I'm playing catch up. Also, other words coming up, that's sad, coming up, agitated. I think all of this is very valid emotions that we feel. Give a little bit more time for people to keep joining if you want to. So if you're angry, uncertain, embarrassing, tired, exacerbated, demoralized, helpless. This is some sort of difficult words coming up on the screen, but I also acknowledging the fact that the system we're operating is difficult. It is inequitable. Feeling self-conscious, and a lot of these words that I really relate to as well. Depleted, deprived, insecure, revengeful, shock. Great. Thank you for sharing all that. And I think really just want to have this moment to really acknowledge how the system can make us feel. And not that I think I can offer any solutions, but I think I'll offer a little bit at the rest of the kind of presentation, the rest of this keynote. I want to address some of the things that I found helpful, how I've thought it through, as well as just sharing some of the lessons I have learned. But I just want to thank you, everyone, for being so, taking that a couple of slides ago, being open, honest, and also remember to be kind to yourself. It's okay to name these things. It's okay to name the issues that's happening to us, happening to people. especially having this space that to be able to talk to one another openly around these issues, whether with people that's more experienced or sort of further down in the academic journey, or those who started together, having that solidarity, I think is really, really important. And if anything that you want to add, do add it to the Zoom chat as well if you want to. Thank you for sharing, and I hope those emotions, keep it there, keep acknowledging them, and then we'll come back to that if we have some time for questions in the end. Yep. So go back to the slides here. There we are. So please seeing back on the slides. And I think first part of this, first half of this keynote is thinking about how we can challenge some of the inequity. I think we've just seen how these privileges and inequities how it can make us feel. And a lot of that is quite negative and challenging emotions. But we need to acknowledge them in order to find way forward and to acknowledge those emotions in ourselves. So this inequality exists in our research culture. That some people are more privileged, so that's visible. Some people are more privileged, that's more invisible. But also the other way around. Some people can be and feel less privileged in this space. And for example, phrases like always like feeling like catching up, for example, or feeling marginalized, because the benefits of what we do in our research are not always shared equally. And sometimes this can be harmful. And these benefits can be unequal for researchers like yourself who are doing PhD research or in other further career pathway in research, but it can also be unequal between researchers and supervisors and senior colleagues. It can also be unequal for humans and non-humans involved, particularly those who are maybe not doing social sciences or art humanity research, but also unequal for wider society, for different cultures, but also unequal for the natural environment. And that's really important to think about where these inequities lie in the context that we research on in the various disciplines. There's something that is in our control. What we can try to do is avoid perpetuating exploitative practices that has existed for a long time within academia and keep challenging those in our own research practice. So think about who is going to see and who is going to not see the benefits of your research in particular. Who or what is being benefited and who or what is going to lose out by the way that you're designing your research, how your data is collected, how data analyzed, how it's presented, thinking about sort of the throughout the research process, who is going to benefit and who might be losing out. And also asking this question for yourself, is your research process going to be extractive and only taking but not giving? So, for example, this could mean that no benefits at all, or no benefits or no opportunities of those involved in your research, whether that's people, those communities, animals, natural environment, cultures, artifacts, or other non-humans. Are you only taking stuff from them but not giving? And that could potentially be an exploitative practice within research that we might be perpetuating, and we need to start challenging those ways of thinking. Just giving you an example, some scholars refer this as the problem of parachute research or helicopter research. So imagine if you are a researcher that's sort of coming in with a helicopter, then landing into the environment or communities that you are researching about out of the blue with no context. And then you just go in, extract the data you need, got everything you wanted, then just leave and never look back again. And that's, for a long time, this is sort of how a lot of research has been done in many disciplines. And there's no sort of meaningful or sustained relationships with the people or the environment that researchers are interacting with throughout the research process. And that can become very extractive and potentially exploitative of the people or community and environment that you're researching with. And the focus is mainly on the research in this approach to research design, and just really getting research done without thinking about how this approach is sort of going in very fast to get what you need and then leaving just as fast, and not thinking about the impact of who or what we're researching about. And this is problematic, and it's an exploitative way of doing research that we don't want to perpetuate, and that needs to change. And this is a particular sort of pertinent issue as a new generation of researchers. Those of you in this conference today, probably sort of more aware of this dynamic, but also that we need to do more to change this. And this can only be done really if we do this collectively. What we need to reflect on, I put in a green box here, is the researcher's position as a point of privilege, that we acknowledge that we as coming in as PGR research in academia, that is already a position of privilege, and how we can use that to build healthier and also more equitable relationships with who and what we're researching about. Because the research process is often temporary, particularly with PhD research, and that is particularly challenging if you only have limited time and resources to interact with for what you're researching about, and this can be sort of really quite challenging to consider. And secondly, I think this is also another issue that's increasingly coming up among PGR research communities, but also further wider academia, is thinking about the de- and post-colonialism in research culture. We need to think through this, I think, as a starting point, to consider the historical context of the research that we're doing. For example, colonial histories, oppression, historically marginalized communities, exploitation, dispossession, and also injustice. And this can come in not only in the kind of people and community research, or only if you do particular type of post-colonial and decolonial research, but also actually how it intersects with our disciplines, our ways of working, and how we can challenge those. And these issues have impacts in the past, but also continually in current and emerging contexts. And that's important to acknowledge, that our research have really intertwined with some of that historical context. So having said all that context, the challenging difficulties, what we can do actually today from going forward, what we can do to build and rebuild. Some suggestions here. First is to think about kind of the research with and not on. Think about that. You're not a researcher who's purely extracting or examining with whatever tools you're doing, whether that's research tools or actual apparatus, or examining who or what you're researching about. Reframe this in your mind and in your approach to researching with and not on what or who are involved in your research. Secondly, it's really important to think about kind of how you can develop research in partnership with who or what you're researching about. This is so important to consider developing kind of the genuine and meaningful partnerships that can be mutually beneficial or share those benefits even wide. And that is important to think about who is sort of at the end of your research or throughout your research process, who might be benefiting and how you can further share those power and privileges and the benefits and opportunities. What we then really need to create and to build is this trust with who or what we're researching with, and be sensitive to their needs and issues and the everyday realities. And this applies not only to people, some of you may be researching with people or on people, but we're also thinking about the environment and other non-humans that might be involved in your research, and consider how our research intersect with these issues and have an impact, and what these issues might likely to manifest in that context. So here's a little bit about kind of how we can create more equity now, sort of moving forward and thinking about we challenge those inequity, think about how we can create, what can we actually do? There's a few things that I think to say that there isn't kind of a silver bullet that's going to solve everything, and everyone's context and everyone's journey is different. But one thing that I think is sure is that equitable relationships really need nurturing and growing. We're all and always should always be still learning. And the good news is that we don't have to do this alone. We can learn from each other, such as in conferences like this, whether that's successes or things that has not gone so well. We need to talk more about those. We need to exchange ideas. I am doing this again. There we are. We need to exchange ideas and also think about how we can share the lessons learned and do all this much better in the future. This is part of the process of learning. And what I've learned for myself, in my own, at least in my research context, I've learned is to think about more about co-creation and participatory principles, particularly when working with people, such as using a method that's called co-design, which is to embed these principles to reflect why and also how the voice and needs of people can be centered, for whom that our research matters, why we do, for what purpose, and for whom, and who's going to benefit. So I want to share two examples today of my own work to embed co-creation principles, which you may find helpful and you might already use in your own research methods, but it's just some of the sort of general guiding principles around how we can go about thinking about research in a more equitable way. And in both of these projects are drawn on participatory research methods to co-design digital innovations with communities, third sector, government, and policy makers, which is bringing these people along with you in your research process so that you design any outcome and products or solutions together. And the examples would make a bit clearer what this means, but it's really thinking about how to create more equitable research processes. So the first one I'm going to talk about today is called a project called Prime, which is the Protecting Minority Ethnic Communities Online project, which I led the design and deliver a set of co-design workshops. And the second one is co-creating a video game with industry and community partners, video game called Seven, and working with digital artists, which helps to amplify the voices and actions of racialized communities and people of color. So let's start with this first project. This is one of a sort of larger project context where we work across disciplines, including urban studies, computer science, cybersecurity, linguistics, and also econometrics and energy. So working in an interdisciplinary environment in this project, which can be looks a little bit different when your PGR programs are much more, sometimes more individualistic or about your own work, particularly in social sciences and humanities, whereas in sciences and medical sciences, and health, that can look a little bit more of a broader context within a lab, for example. We also work with two community partners, particularly for the co-design work. In Scotland, it's SEMVO, which is an umbrella organization for third sector organizations that work on anti-racism and race equality, and BRAP in Birmingham, who is also a big anti-racism a stakeholder in the sector, particularly in England. So what we did sort of start with this end goal of delivering these co-design workshops to come up with citizen-led solutions to counter the harm caused by data, algorithms, and digital services. Wrong arrow, there we are. And using the participatory and co-design methods, we wanted to develop fairer and also more trustworthy digital services. So this involved having workshops with key community organizations who have strong connections with people in communities of color, whilst also getting support from service providers, governments such as Scottish Government, NHS, Public Health Scotland, regulators, third sector, and data computer science, all in the same room, and having everyone is being treated as having an equal voice in the process of designing new solutions that can tackle some of those harms in digital services. Then we work with computer scientists in our teams to develop some prototypes. So these workshops is all about designing and coming up with ideas for those prototypes. And what we really wanted to do through these workshops is make sure that those solutions are citizen-led. That to tackle digital harms and racism and inequities, we need to have to engage with marginalized communities early and iteratively in the design process, and treat people in communities with lived experience as having equal expertise compared to those who are typically afforded more power or more privilege, such as people who have technical skills or policy stakeholders. So that was a challenging process to have in place so that these workshops can facilitate that very equal voice amongst everyone. And what the workshops aim to do is have this centering the voice of racialized people in a responsible AI innovation. Involve things like deliberation on people's needs and priorities, particularly centering the voice of the communities. We also did workshop to co-create some principles and solutions for the prototypes and digital services to follow. And with the workshops, we're also thinking about strengthening the capacity within the communities. We're not under under a false disguise that with 2 or 3 workshops, we're going to find the magic solutions that are going to solve all the issues around racism and inequities within digital services. But actually using that process, especially with this project, is to sort of facilitate those conversations to take place with communities and communities with stakeholders who they may have very little interactions with normally, or in a very different power dynamic, often in kind of lobbying, activism type of context. But this is actually bringing people together and think about solutions together by centering the voice of the communities. And that sort of modeling of an approach and thinking that the continuation of these conversations can happen by the community, led by the communities themselves. And that's an important consideration, so that we're not thinking about how we can sort of fix problems retrospectively as well with these co-design workshops. By bringing people's views early, we can actually co-create tools that can be equitable and responsible by design. So here's just a little bit of summary of what of the types of people involved, and we had some graphic recording done as well, which helps to actually one way to address how we can capture the workshop discussions, but also actually an illustration of the discussion and help people to process in a visual way, particularly for people who are not necessarily familiar or used to feeling comfortable in a context where there's lots of ideas bouncing about, or you could create sort of like kind of like very focused discussions that doesn't often happen. And that was a helpful way particularly for people in communities to understand and follow what's going on and reflect on some of those discussions. March on through. And I think sort of lesson learned from that is that from the start, being really clear about what needs to happen in the research, what you aim to achieve, and also have important principles and values that are unique to your research context, be clear on the outputs, what to watch out for, and also the practicalities that need addressing, including ethical considerations. And we have this for each workshop. Just going to put this up here. There's a lot of text here, but just as an example, and also going forward, these might be some of the principles you want to consider. So for example, one of our important principles to us was that we need to be equitable in our interactions and ask of participants. This is important value to us. Equal voice in deliberation was also an important one. Respect. And then going into just a little bit more detail about how having not tokenistic consultation with people, but create spaces of meaningful participation, such as in defining the problem in a sort of designing a software solution. Problem definition is the step one. So bringing people in a meaningful participation in that step one was really important to us. Then we also have things like excellent professional workshop facilitation skills that is deemed crucial and critical to foster meaningful participation, openness to new ideas, treating lived experience to be as valuable as technical skills, and then also principles of equity, empowerment, agency, inclusion, and knowledge co-production throughout. Finally, here a point I think is also important to consider is that seeking support of local community organizations who understand local area and communities and the key issues that racialized individuals are facing. So this is sort of that avoiding that helicopter mentality or helicopter research mentality again, that we go in to fix every problem, but we are saying here that actually the local community organizations who are the ones who can sustain and have sustained relationships with people, and we're working together with these organizations to enable change. So also a list of things that we said we would want to watch out for, and I think that's perhaps important for most research contexts too. For example, about the power dynamics in the room, we acknowledge the power imbalance that may be present across the range of stakeholders involved. So we had to design ways to ensure that the activities that we do in the workshops would address the power dynamics. For example, having more different ways of participating, such as writing, can also have more creative ways of participating to create that level playing field for everyone in the context of the workshop. Think about fair compensation is also really important for equitable research, to compensate for participants' times and expertise, and to not perpetuate the exploitation of labor on marginalized communities. Also think about travel and care expenses, British Sign Language interpretation, and translators. But I don't think I'm going to go through the whole list here, but also sensitivities around anti-racism, that not shooting down ideas that can be transformative, and then not causing harm or reliving trauma. One of the emerging critique around working with people with lived experience is to not ask people to be under pressure to share personal experiences or direct or institutional racism. That is a good practice to not actually force people to have to relive the trauma and keep telling how they're being harmed, and sort of create this dynamic of people who are in marginalized communities need help and are suffering versus actually people in this community are also resourceful, also have lots of skills to offer and also ideas to share. And that's an important sort of balancing that dynamic when you facilitate some of these research too. And finally, that have very clear mechanism protocols for safeguarding for participants, particularly if your research topic is sensitive. Right. Second project here, I've got limited time left now, is this our video game project called Seven, which is co-created with the Ethnic Minority Environmental Network, Education Evolved, which is a tech company, the Floating Designer, and the University of Glasgow Games and Gaming Lab. We created this game to amplify the voice of marginalized ethnic people and also traditional ecological knowledge in Scotland's sustainable future. There's much more about kind of applying those co-creation principles learned from the previous projects into this project to create a different technology, which is a video game. Let's talk about what we did in the game that I think helps highlight that how we can amplify voices of communities. So first, then, this is a picture of the game. A screenshot from it is set in a virtual replica of the Western Scottish Highlands in 2045, reconstructed using real satellite images. And this is another thing that sort of like enable people to connect with the Scottish landscape was really important, considered by the Ethnic Minority Environmental Network. And we had 3 workshops focused on ideating what the game would look like. What was really cool was that what ideas from the first workshop really became that you can see elements of those in this final product, which I think was really cool, including the idea of having different narratives and mini games within the game, and that's also timed. But what was really interesting and really useful was relying on the expertise and the network that the Ethnic Minority Environmental Network had. They already had knowledge of the real-life climate actions that were minoritized ethnic-led and by the organization initiative across Scotland. So we based our real mini-games on these real-life climate actions, such as solarizing institutions of worship that was led by Glasgow's Central Mosque, but also other things like rainwater collection, wildflower meadows, circular economy, a wildlife pond, urban farming, and also women's rights in cycling. And one of the key objectives of the game, which is to listen and to learn from the character that are voiced by and created in the likeness of real minoritized ethnic people in Scotland. And that was something that we're really proud of, and also about authentic representation in the things that we can share with the public. So importantly, it's about highlighting the importance of traditional ecological knowledge and how it can help Scotland to be more sustainable. What we wanted to achieve was that players, after playing the game, would feel inspired by the climate actions led by the minoritized ethnic people and the communities. And this immersive narrative of the future is really important in creating this video game. And it's now become freely, publicly available since last May when we soft launched the game. And it's now sort of in a way thinking about impact, thinking about how it would be used for education, community, and also policy engagement. If you're interested in this journey, which I'm not going to go into further details today, but we have published a toolkit together with all the project partners about how to co-create a video game in this academic industry community partnership model using Seven as an example. So there's a wee link at the end of the presentation if you want to look at how this game came together and some key principles around co-creation. Please do have a look at that toolkit. So as a final reflection, I want to end on perhaps offering some of my top tips about where to start. From all the lessons I've learned so far, sort of 3 things that I urge everyone here to consider to create more equity and also challenge inequity we face as a starting point, particularly if this is only after 1 month into your PhD journey, or if you're first year or your final year, still important to consider these 3 things. Firstly, is to value diverse forms of expertise and knowledge. I'll go into more detail in the coming slides. Build equitable relationships with who or what you're researching with, and make sure who or what you research know or see the benefits of your research. So first of all, it's about top tip, kind of this tip number 1 is valuing diverse forms of expertise and knowledge, particularly as you saw as elements in the project around the video game 7. And this knowledge can come from communities, can be from different sectors you're operating in, and from outside of academia. And that's really particularly important when, as we go forward as PGR students, what role do we want to play as a researcher, how we can research with the people, but also considering other forms of knowledge as typically more marginalized, such as traditional knowledge and also ancestral wisdom and traditions. These can be particularly important for racialized communities in my own research, but can also be useful, for example, in thinking about sustainable practices. It's asking yourself who you see as experts, who in your discipline and your sector historically and typically feel invisible or not valued enough as experts, how your work can help amplify some of those voices and create more equity and parity in the voice and the actions of the knowledge that's being shared, who is being considered an expert. A useful notion I find is about valuing expertise by lived experience, or also expertise by learning. So we can have people who are living through the issues, well, people or non-humans that living through those issues by lived experience, but also by learning. That's people who have subject expertise by learning about, for example, anti-racism infrastructure and how that works. And these could be, for example, particularly around lived experience, but also by learning, community and faith leaders, third sector organizations, it could also be activists and campaigners, artists, community scholars, or could be marginalized identities, cultures, and subcultures. But of course, it can also be natural habitats, and the inhabitants of these habitats, like animals, insects, and plants that are living alongside humans. There'll be experts and researchers who are marginalized and pushed up, particularly by systemic injustice in academia across the world. So, whatever your research context is, make sure you think about the dynamics of who does and who doesn't have power in the production of knowledge. And you can use your research to turn the dial and strike a better balance in the voices and the power of the research process in your discipline. Second tip, building around more equitable relationships with who and what you research on. And this should be done right from the start. It needs to be intentional and also deliberate. And to thought through more carefully, you need to develop processes and put them in place early so that these relationships are equitable and also non-exploitative in a way that is right for the context you are researching. So for example, one thing you can do is provide options and conversations about the recognition and compensation that would be beneficial to your research participants, or who or what you're researching on. And if the what you're researching on might be organizations that are guardians of natural habitats, for example. So thinking about the participant incentives, but also reasonable compensation of people's time, expertise, and their labor. So people don't end up being worse off after participating in your research. You need to think about what is beneficial to the people and organizations involved. So for example, in our workshops, we offered the option for participants in the workshop to be named as co-author in our outputs, and including people for communities and outside of academia, if they find that is beneficial to them. And that's one way, again, to just keep having conversations about sharing power. Finally, the third tip is that to kind of make sure that the benefits of your research are seen and shared with who and what you research. It is so important to be really clear about the outcomes and who or what you research will have an impact on, about who's this impact going to be positive or negative for. You should also think about this from the start of your research. Ask yourself, are the benefits of your research clear? Are they being shared equally? Are the benefits then clearly communicated after the research, rather than just leaving it out of the dark that people would figure out by themselves? But also think about what changes are going to be visible and felt by whom or what you research with. That's going to be really important, that people or environments that you research in feel a visible impact in their life, so that they feel like their participation was meaningful or have a positive impact on them, and whether there's any actual changes because of the research in the research process. So I'm scrolling through. That's me. Thank you very much. I'm going to wrap up there. Please do get in touch, and thank you so much for listening, and happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.